DPP will look at the recommendations of the Commission and also look at what admissible evidence can be mustered to support charges. The DPP will then decide whether or not to bring those charges, and if they do, the DPP will prosecute them. ICAC's out of that. But there are other agencies involved. You might have seen that the Commission recommended that the New South Wales Crime Commission look at asset seizure, and there are also some federal agencies involved who look at breaches of duties which were owed by certain of the people as company directors.
Australian Taxation Office is another one that I've heard mentioned in dispatches.
Yes, the Australian Taxation Office will look very carefully at the recommendation, which really emerged from strange evidence about the way in which the Obeids organised their financial affairs through a series of trusts. At one stage, the people who were running the trust, the actual bookkeeper, described their own books as a shambles. And so there'd be quite a bit of work, I think, in front of the ATO to see what they can get out of that.
If we return to the idea of possible future criminal prosecutions, how much of what was revealed over the course of the ICAC inquiries would not be admissible in any possible future criminal prosecution?
When you come before ICAC, ICAC has particular powers to compel you to answer questions or to produce documents which there is no corresponding power in a court. I shouldn't say we. I'm independent of ICAC, but ICAC is an investigatory body. And so somebody who is compelled to answer a question, even though it may incriminate them, is able to take protection and object to that. Those objections were taken, so their own evidence can't be used against themselves. Sifting through it to see which parts of the evidence would be admissible or inadmissible in a trial is a large task.
Yes, one you won't have to do. We will come to some of the large tasks you've performed a bit later. Shortly after the findings were made public, Eddie Obeid rejected the assertions of the Commissioner that he acted in any way that could amount to corrupt conduct, and Ian McDonald said the findings are not justified by the evidence when it's carefully read and analysed. And I will be seeking a review of this through the court processes in the near future, he added. Is whatever happens next going to be in the courts for years?
Well, it could be. It could be. There are some very powerful and some very wealthy people involved, and I think that they will be willing to take it as far as they can. There are two aspects to it, obviously. There would be that part foreshadowed by Mr. Obeid and Mr. McDonald, where they said that they would challenge the findings of ICAC. That's one aspect of it. And then there's the other aspect, which would be any criminal charges which may flow in due course. So both of those processes will be bumbling along together, but it could take a while.
So in a way, you've just been part of what might be described as the first act.
That may well be right. I mean, I hope it happens sooner rather than later, and I hope our system doesn't let us all down by delaying things by too much.
When you were asked to be counsel assisting by the ICAC Commissioner, David Ip, any hesitation on your part?
Oh, none at all. Look, I don't want to make myself sound like a hero, but it's not exactly the best paid legal work that you can get. But this has just been one of the best and most fascinating experiences of my career, and the pleasure of working with Commissioner Ip. If anybody had the chance to do that, they should take it.
Oh, well, I expect very few people listening now will have that chance. But how would you, for people not familiar with what counsel assisting in an ICAC inquiry does, how would you describe the role?
It's an unusual role because it's nothing like the usual job of a barrister in a trial. In a trial, for example, you're completely separate from the judge. As counsel assisting, you are literally there to assist the Commission and the Commissioner on tasks. So there's a great deal of cooperation between you and the Commissioner, but at the same time you've got to exercise an independent judgment, so that quite often the Commissioner would come to a view and I would come to a different view, and I would say, well, this is my advice, and it might be quite the contrary, and every now and then, but not all that often, I might even get my way.
So when you were in the middle of the many days of hearings that this took, do you have a kind of confab in the morning or the night before where you say, this is what I want to explore today?
Well, with the Commissioner, I mean, I would work on that with our legal team. I had a junior barrister, Nicholas Chen, lawyers from ICAC, investigators from ICAC, and we would assemble and plan what we would do. We would also, of course, involve the Commissioner so that he was able to get on top of the materials and read what he needed to read to be in charge that day.
There was a huge amount of reading. It's sort of almost the labours of Hercules, something like 60,000 documents.
Could have been more.
How was it all gathered? How was the evidence gathered? What are you able to say about that?
Well, I always say it's a little bit like a spy movie. The way that little pieces of information came to us, and then we would go further and explore that. It was just wonderful watching it unfold. But it didn't take 2 hours like a movie does. It took months and months and months, so that we would hear from a witness some suggestion of the involvement of another person, and then the appropriate summonses would be issued, and we'd get that person in and question them, and then we'd capture more records which would tell us whether or not the line we're investigating was a good line or not. And it just unfolds just gradually. It was a fantastic experience, because there'd be some days when witnesses in the private investigation part would tell us things about which we knew nothing.
And was it at that point, were you making an effort to maintain a straight face, or at least a poker face?
Usually I would be playing a complete straight face, in the sense that we like the witnesses to think we already knew.
That's it.
We already knew these things. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that some of the witnesses would come along and say, but of course that was so-and-so who took that money. I'd have to keep a straight face. And we'd never heard of the involvement of so-and-so or this sum of money. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. The whole of the ICAC public hearing is just one last step in what is a very long investigation.
So how long was your total involvement?
I guess I was involved for well over a year.
In your opening address to the ICAC, you said the story isn't linear. How did you go about creating a narrative to tell such a complicated story?
Gee, that was hard. It was really hard. It was really an accumulation of around about 6 or 7, or maybe up to 15 different smaller stories. And there was no chronology. All of a sudden it would branch off into some other interesting aspect. Putting all of that together so that one story could be told, that was probably the most difficult legal task I've ever been given. We tried to tell it as best we could as a story, as a coherent story.
That opening address of yours went, I think, for more than 3 hours, and it gave the outline of the very complex story, the two different spheres, really, politics and business. In your line, corruption on a scale probably unexceeded since the days of the Rum Corps, has been much quoted, actually. What made you come up with that comparison?
It was a fluke. What happened was, I was actually engaged in another case down in Canberra, and I was flying down to Canberra, and I met my junior in that case at the Qantas Club, and she's interested in the history of Captain Bligh. And so we were talking about how terrible it is that Captain Bligh is such a blackened character. When we're on the plane, it's only a short journey down to Canberra, that line came into my head. And when we hit the ground down in Canberra, I said, Valerie, do you have a pen and a piece of paper? And so I wrote it down. I think in the end it's been a pretty good line.
You're listening to Sunday Profile. I'm Richard Obeid. This week my guest is Geoffrey Watson, SC, barrister and counsel assisting the recent ICAC inquiries in New South Wales. You question people who are used to having power and enjoying power, both politicians and business people. What was it like to interrogate them?
Well, great fun. It was a great challenge. I've done a few of these ICAC inquiries now, and questioning a politician is completely different to questioning an ordinary witness. Now, I don't want to disparage politicians. There's a lot of good, great politicians, but you've got to remember that they spend every day of their life avoiding answering questions.
Believe me, I'm aware of this.
So the challenge that they presented was a special challenge, and so that aspect was good. And of course there were some other people, some very powerful men who I think were unaccustomed to being interrogated.
Yes, and some of them gave you the evil eye, in effect, or seemed to try to do that.
Oh, I've got no doubt. One of the fellows got in the box and he stared at me, and I could see that he was just thinking to himself, "You ant, I'm going to crush you." And I just recall just standing there looking at him eye to eye. I think I might have got the better of him on that day.
Yes,
I was a bit lucky.
Does that make you think, actually, no, I'm going to get you? I am.
Oh,
It'd be a very human response.
it is actually. I'm sorry. There were moments when it was quite personal. It was different to a courtroom. It was, as I say, an investigation. And there were times when, the witnesses were trying to provoke me, and I guess I was trying to provoke them.
Well, yes, and I can think of a few examples. There's that, and another much quoted moment when you said to Ian McDonald, "Look, Mr. McDonald, what I really want to put to you is that in fact you're a crook, and that what you did was you agreed with Eddie Obeid and his family to create the Mount Penny tenement, and you agreed to do this because they asked you to." Now that did get under his skin, didn't it?
That came about in an unfortunate way. What had happened immediately before that is that a number of objections have been taken to my questions to Mr. McDonald, and then his barrister said something to the effect that I should put the proposition to Mr. McDonald. So, well, on the spur of the moment,
that was the proposition you put.
It came out that way.
And there was another example when you managed, Eddie Obeid, in response to something you said, and he almost hissed, actually, "I've spent more money than you've made in a lifetime."
Yes, that was a moment which actually, I must say, left me speechless. And if you knew me, Richard, that's quite an achievement by Mr. Obeid to have done that. I was stunned that he said that to me, and for me, it's one of the really golden memories I have of that inquiry, is that where I was standing, there was a kind of box, and my mobile phone was just down. And one of my sons who'd been following the evidence and had heard that line sent me a text message which said, "Well, Dad, you'd have to concede that that part of the evidence was honest and accurate."
At what point, throughout these proceedings, long and complex as they were, did you know that ICAC would recommend corruption findings?
Oh, I feel a bit out of line in commenting about the strength of the criminal charges, in the sense that that's going to go to the DPP. Can I tell you, I never had any doubt that we would fail in establishing those matters I set out in the opening. I was always confident that it was a really very strong case, and that every single one of Commissioner Ripp's findings and recommendations is solidly based upon evidence.
So from fairly early on for you, you were pretty sure that this was going to be, the outcome that we've ended up getting was the likely one?
Yes. Yes.
What was the most memorable moment for you during the hearings?
Gee, there were a couple of sparkling moments there from time to time. I mean, Mr. Obeid and his money comment was a big one for me. The challenge presented by putting the opening was a great one, and I was pretty happy with that. But one of the really good moments for me was when I asked one of the witnesses, Travis Duncan, about the expression weasel words, and he had denied ever using such an expression, or even further denied that he would ever use it in the context which I suggested, and then we put on a telephone intercept, and he had used that precise expression. When the Commissioner asked him to explain what he meant by weasel words, his definition of it was something along these lines: a full and ample explanation. And for some reason or another, that really tickled my fancy. I really look back on it and think that was just a great moment, just a great line.
Yes, because it seems to be precisely the opposite of what words would normally be considered to be. So in that's an example, and you must have done this a lot in the inquiry, and I'm sure in your other professional work, where you are essentially laying a trap for the person, the witness that you're asking questions of. You don't know if they're going to fall into it or whether they're going to essentially concede they have said something. When you're doing that, are you hoping they're going to admit it and then you get to play the tape, or are you actually hoping they won't admit it and then you confront them with the tape?
Oh, it's the second. The first one would be no fun at all. It's a kind of odd thing. I mean, it is an opportunity for a person to tell their story, and if they say something which accepts what's on the tape before the tape is played, it's a vindication of their honesty. So you give them the opportunity: what happened, or did you ever say this, blah blah blah. But the golden moment is when they deny it, and you know that you can prove them wrong.
And you have on occasions got them to deny it several times before you actually play the tape.
I was stunned. It was just time after time after time that things which I asked them were specifically, directly contradicted by the telephone intercepts.
It was a mammoth task. I understand at one point your voice went pretty much.
Oh, that was before it started. I tried to rehearse the opening. So I was at home, and I live in a house with a couple of sons who are pretty quick to point out my failings. And I thought I was being a bit of a jerk in rehearsing this thing. So I hid myself in one of the rooms, and I rehearsed the thing by whispering. Now, it was only after that I found out that that's the worst thing you can do to your voice. So that this was on the Saturday, and the inquiry's opening on the Tuesday or something, and I've done this thing to my voice so that it's actually failing just before the inquiry is due to start. Oh, that was a scary moment. I thought I was going to get up with no voice at all, or I'd have to get my junior to read the opening.
So you essentially spent 3 hours, or possibly more, on the Saturday, whispering in a quiet room of your house.
Yes.
The opening.
It is. It's hard work.
What did you take for it? I've got to tell you, as somebody who has to use their voice for a living, black tea I find very helpful.
Wish I'd been able to speak to you, Richard. I went around to pharmacies and they said, oh, there's nothing you can do. I went on the internet and I actually did a Google search of what do opera singers do to protect their voice. And there are all these things about drinking tea with honey in it, things like that. Actually, now black tea was one of the things. So I did what I could. It didn't fail. It worked out on the day. But I can tell you I was very worried about that.
When you got to the end of it, that was the beginning of it, when you got to the end of it, did you think, okay, now I need to go and lie on a beach or in a darkened room or something like that?
Oh, just the opposite. We finished on a Thursday at about 4 o'clock, 4:30, something like that. I packed up my things, went back to Chambers, went downstairs, got in a cab, went out to the airport and flew to Canberra, where I was studying a case the next day.
And you felt fine about doing that? You weren't exhausted or...?
I think I've got pretty good stamina. I'm probably, physically speaking, one of the laziest people in the country. But on the other hand, I've never really had any problems with doing the work of a barrister, which a lot of people would say is not very demanding. I'm just reading papers.
Well, I understand that the work of a barrister can be very demanding because there's so much reading and then thinking, and that the bit you see in court's the tip of the iceberg. But so were you, throughout the proceedings, sort of going home and dealing with these voluminous notes?
Well, to be honest, most of the nights I watched television.
You did not?
One of my sons and I think we watched a couple of seasons of The Wire.
Right. Fantastic program.
Yes, we may have caught up on Mad Men. We tend to wait until the television series is finished and then go and borrow the DVD from Blockbuster or whatever and watch a few in a row. But I do remember during the inquiry that certainly we saw several seasons of Breaking Bad. Could I recommend that to your listeners? It's a great show. No, that was relaxation time. I get up and start pretty early. Normally start around about 6 o'clock in the morning. But you've got to remember that there had been quite a bit of preparation work going into this.
It's all right. You really don't have to get defensive about this. How did your family cope during this time? It was busy and it was full on.
My family were pretty relaxed people. One of my sons was doing the high school certificate, and I used to hear from people, they'd say, "Oh my God, such a terrible burden, you were such a concern with your children doing the high school certificate." I cannot remember one moment when there was any problem about that in my household.
Nobody has ever said that to me before.
My sons are pretty relaxed.
So, what was it like to go back to your regular work? You work, most of your practice is in areas like product liability. You've been counsel for companies like James Hardie. Bit of a contrast.
Yes. I've done James Hardie's cases Australia-wide for, well, I don't know, 15 or so years, maybe longer. I've had a close association with that company, and I've also represented drug companies and motor car companies and cigarette companies, and normally I'm the person in the courtroom wearing the black hat, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So ICAC was quite refreshing in the sense that...
White hat?
You might have thought that I was wearing the white hat. Now, I know people might disagree with the white hat, black hat characterisation, but just in those broad terms, it was quite different for me.
I understand. People weren't disagreeing with the white hat characterisation at all. You were being stopped in the street by people saying, "Well done, keep going," that kind of thing.
Yes, actually, I don't really suffer nerves, and I really don't feel too much pressure. But there were some mornings when I would walk down to ICAC with Nicholas Chen, and people would be calling out to us, and, well, not to put too fine a point on it, they were saying things like, "Get the bastards." And anyway, we felt we had a job to do. We did it as fully and as fairly as we could.
It has been a pleasure to have you on Sunday Profile. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, it's very kind of you to have me.
Jeffrey Watson, SC, Counsel Assisting the recent New South Wales.
Okay, that's it. Ciao.